Hello and welcome back to the Developing Solutions with Sitecore Print Experience Manager video training series. So in this video, we'll look at actually implementing the PXM project now that we've gone past the project planning stage and actually get into the implementation. So here's our overall project plan, and if you remember way back to our early background requirements, we had a number of different scenarios from a number of different people within the organization. We had the web director who wanted to do real-time personalization of articles. We had the designer who wanted to simply automate article creation. We had the marketing manager who wanted to automate the process of the book. In all those cases, we're still working with the same content coming from Launch Sitecore, and we're still, by and large, working with the same design. And so we're going to start our project plan small. We're going to build out a single article, make sure we have the content modeling and layout correct, and then we'll start to add complexity. We'll start to build out a few more of the more interesting scenarios. So we'll turn the article into a flow so it can accommodate different lengths of articles. We'll start to add some automation, and we'll start to do some final touches like the table of contents and possibly even doing renderers to dynamically resize images and a lot of other little interesting tweaks as well. And so that's really the plan in a nutshell. We're going to start small, introduce concepts gradually, and then by the end we'll have a very complex, very interesting PXM project, but it will have seemed fairly simple because we'll be approaching this incrementally. Okay, so let's look at the actual implementation. We're going to do a few things up front. First off, we're going to ensure that the fonts are either installed to our system in general or copied to the InDesign fonts folder. Now, when you start working with the design that's provided to you, in this case, you're probably going to see that the fonts are missing. And this is because the original document that was provided to us from Nonlinear Creations uses their fonts that they have licensed. I've repurposed that for myself to use fonts that we've licensed internally within Sitecore. Those fonts aren't distributed and can't be distributed publicly. And so what you're going to have to do is basically choose a font that you have on your system and ensure that you're using those for your styles and for your output. But in our case here, because we're working with some real-world examples, I'm going to show you how to go through that process. Next, we'll take that source document and we'll upload that to PXM as a master document. And next we'll create our PXM project and start to do some of that content item remapping and start to do some of that document transformation that we discussed in order to handle automation scenarios. So we'll start to do that right now. Okay, so we have our document template from Nonlinear Creations and we've opened it here in InDesign. Now the first thing that you're going to see is that anytime there's a number of fonts that are used on this page that are missing, and this is again because of licensing and distribution issues. We can't distribute it. So I'm going to swap out these fonts. In this case, you can see what the font being selected is. This is Avenir. It's in brackets because it's missing. We're seeing this pink error message here, again because it's missing. I'm going to swap that out for a font that I do have, which is the Sitecore font of Kivit. So you'll need to, in turn, find a font that you have on your system. You can do that in InDesign by selecting that. You can see here what you do have installed. And so we'll be going through and we'll be updating our paragraph styles and character styles in order to use different fonts. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to actually install the fonts that you may have provided to you from a designer. So I've got my fonts here. These are the Sitecore fonts, and I've put them in my fonts directory for Adobe InDesign CC 2014. Now, if you want these fonts to appear system-wide, you merely need to click on them and click on install, and that will do that. Now, because I'm remoted into a machine, we're not quite seeing the font smoothing that we see here, so I'll try to update that for another session so that we're getting the really high quality output that we're seeing. But that's really step two. If you do have fonts provided to you, make sure that they're either installed to the system or they're installed to InDesign itself. And then at that point, a lot of these errors will go away. They haven't for us yet because we need to do some remapping, and that's some style exercises that we'll do later. So next we'll upload this document as a master document to Sitecore. And we saw earlier we did that as a quick example. We're going to go through that again. This is a pretty core concept to Sitecore and PXM in general. So we're going to ensure that we're logged in. If we aren't, please do that. And we're going to go to the libraries, and we see here we have these master documents and we have a launch Sitecore design. I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to give it the name NLC design for now. Eventually, as we add more Sitecore elements to it, this should become more of a Sitecore design. But for now, to keep this distinction, I'm going to call that NLC design. And what it's doing is it's uploading that as a master document into the Sitecore repository so that it can be used within PXM. So if I now go to download or load this master document, what you'll see here is that it's stripped out all of the page information, and it's maintained our spreads. And so we can see a few little tweaks here, nonlinear creations. We're going to change that to launch Sitecore. We can see various other pages. These have no footers. These are the ones used for chapter titles, so you can see some of the text boxes that are defined for some of that structure that we've been seeing in that document. Lastly, we all have our paragraph styles and our character styles. Some of the paragraph styles, again, that we saw earlier, we're going to add as unique paragraph styles. So if there was an override for that chapter heading, we're going to add those as paragraph styles here. And so that's really the exercise of adding that as a master document. That's kind of the first step. Get those core design elements into Sitecore for PXM to use. So we'll close this and continue on. So next we'll go through the steps of actually creating a PXM project for one of those articles. So we'll go again to our Libraries tab, and we'll go to our Print Studio projects, and I'm going to say add a new project, and we're going to call this Launch Sitecore article. Again, we can use branch templates if you've configured branch templates to automatically build out large project structures. In this case, the branch template's just going to build out a few elements. So we now have that Launch Sitecore article. Now I've closed my project window. So to bring that back up, go to Window, Sitecore Project, and that will bring up my project window. And I've actually got that old demo project loaded. So I'm going to replace that and load my Launch Sitecore article. I'm going to add a new document, and you'll see here that the document refers to the default master. I'm going to change that, and we're going to use our NLC design. So in order to assign that, I drag and drop that over, and so now my document is using the NLC design master, which is what we want. Next, I'm going to add a new page, and I'm going to call this article. And now I can start working with this as a PXM project. I can load this and I can start dragging and dropping elements onto that, or I can keep this project loaded and drag and drop elements from a document that I'm going to import. And so early on when I showed simple PXM projects, I was dragging and dropping elements from the CMS onto the page, and that automatically created a reference. In this case here, what I want to do is I want to ensure that my design that's coming from what my designer provided to me, I want my design to be maintained. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these elements. So I have a title, I have this image, and I have this body here. I'm going to select these, and I'm going to drag and drop them to that page that I created. And what PXM is going to do is it's basically going to create a new snippet. And again, a snippet is something for grouping items, and it's grouped all of these items, and I have my text frame and image frame and all of this information. It's now created in that PXM project. Now if I was to load this, what you're going to see is a lot of those same elements on the page. So I have that title, I have the subtitle, and I have this body text. The image is missing, and that's okay. Again, this image that we're seeing here in this document, this is really a preview. It's embedded in the InDesign document. If you had a full packaged project, you would see a reference to this on the hard drive. This is fine that it's blank, because what we're going to be getting in the end is the images of our authors from our launch Sitecore content. So it's okay that it's blank. It's really just a placeholder there for now. It's this image frame, and the image will come from another source later on. So what we've done here is we've really created a new project. We've imported in these design elements. We've got the master document. And so everything is looking pretty much the way that we want it to. But the only thing that it's not doing is it's not referring to Sitecore content. Second thing it's not doing is it's not being broken up into separate fields. So right now here we have one field that has Molly's name and title. We want those to be coming from two separate fields within our Sitecore content. So we're going to take that, break this up into two separate fields, put that onto a page. So we're going to start to do a number of those elements now. So let's now go back to Sitecore and we'll take a look at that PXM project that was created. So all of the elements here are updated in real time from the InDesign plugin to Sitecore. So we'll go through here and we're going to do a few things here. One, do a few UI operations. So if you double click on a snippet, you'll see that all the child elements within that snippet are selected. And this is excellent for grouping. So I'm now going to rename the snippet article, because all of these child items are associated with the article. This is the title of the article. This is the author of the article. This is the body of the article. That all makes sense. Next, we'll go through and we'll rename a number of these text frames. And so you can see here, the ordering isn't necessarily clear. And so we're going to rename these so that it makes a bit more sense. So we've got the title there. We've got our author here, and we have our body here. So that's great. So if we now go back to Sitecore and do a bit of a refresh, you can see that the naming here in our PXM project and the elements reflect what we did back in InDesign. Next thing we're going to do is manually associate this content with an item in Sitecore. So we're going to go and pick a Sitecore article. In my case here, I like using the Sitecore UIs. It has a lot of interesting content. And so we're going to go and we're going to save that. And we're going to do this a few times here. So first on the snippet itself, and then on each of our fields. So text, the image frame, the image itself, the title, and the author. So we're now associating all of our items to the correct Sitecore item, but of course what we also need is a field to go along with those as well. So we'll leave author for now, and we'll concentrate on the title field, which I believe is title, and the body field, which should be body. At this point, all this information is saved. If I go back to InDesign, I can simply reload this page, and all that information is now reflected right away. So we can see, we now have the title of that content, the Sitecore user interfaces. We now have the body information of that content. This is no longer what we imported from that original nonlinear creation source document. This is now pointing to content within Sitecore. Now we've left our author information here and our image here, and the reason for that is because what we're going to do is we're going to build out a custom renderer. In our Sitecore item, that Sitecore UIs item, that actually comes in as a lookup field. So, that information is Brandon Royal. It's not actually on that article content itself. And so what we're going to do is, in the same way that this is basically a lookup field that goes and gets the source of Brandon Royal to display his name here, we're going to build a custom lookup renderer that will render out Brandon's name and Brandon's title and render out Brandon's image onto that page. And so that's going to be a development exercise, and we'll be going to Visual Studio for that. So before we go to Visual Studio, we're going to see what else we can do within our PXM project that's solely configuration. Now, one thing that really pops out to me right now is the fact that this content here is Times New Roman. Everything else is formatted nicely. We have the correct font. We have it looks good in the design. We've got our image, but this Times New Roman is really popping out. And what that is that's part of the transformation engine within PXM. So let's go and configure this and see what's going on here with this paragraph style. And we're seeing here it's called heading 3. So what PXM does is, within our module settings, we have this idea of transformations here. And we can see that there's a transformation definition for the HTML element H3, and that in turn is rendering out a style called heading 3. Now, in InDesign, there was no existing style called heading 3 in our master document, so PXM created one on the fly. The problem with that is that heading 3 is basically empty. There's no styling information whatsoever, so it's falling back to the Times New Roman no paragraph style, essentially. So if we go through here and take a look at our other paragraph styles that do exist, there is one called heading 3, and that looks much, much nicer. And so what's happening is there's some styles that we haven't mapped, and so it's using defaults. And so what you need to go do is undertake an exercise of looking at all of your HTML, looking at what your HTML elements are and what your CSS classes are, and go through an exercise of mapping that to either existing paragraph styles in your master document or potentially even making new paragraph styles. And so we're not going to go through that whole step for every single style. I'm going to do this once for paragraph. So before it was heading 3, it's called heading space 3. It's a fairly simple fix. So back in our definitions, I'm going to make heading space 3. Again, the next time we load this document, and I'm going to reload that page, you can see, great, that paragraph style was correctly applied. We're going to do some more transformations later on. Some of the content within our Launch Sitecore article uses some very interesting HTML elements like the pre tag for pre-formatted. So we're going to render that out to code so you can really see some nice, very distinct, visually distinct elements on that page. So that's one of the first things that we're going to do. The second thing that we're going to do here is go back to our article, and we're going to make a copy of our body element, and we're going to call that abstract and say OK. And right now this has basically the same properties as the body, so we're going to change that field reference to say abstract as well, and we're going to save that. Now we'll go back here and we're going to do a refresh because we have made some changes to our project, and then we're going to load. And so we can see here that we've got some duplicate. We've got our abstract here, which is taking up a lot of space, so we're going to move this down a little bit. And then we're going to say save, and save the current item. And this gives us two options. First is to save the layout, and the second is to save the content. If we were making content changes and we wanted our designer to push those content changes back to Sitecore, we would enable that and say, yes, push that change back to Sitecore. This can be enabled or disabled for PXM on the whole or based upon permissions. It's a very important distinction when you're implementing a PXM project to understand who has the permissions to do that, what are their roles, and whether you want to give that permission. In our case here, we're just saving the layout, so that's excellent. Now we're going to set some options to basically have this content automatically push up or down depending upon how large this content above it is. So we'll do that, and we'll save that back to the CMS as well. But we just wanted to go through that simple exercise of showing you some of the transformation set changes, and then how to push a simple content change back. So if we now again reload this, you're going to see here that it's reloading based upon what's in the project. So even though we made changes here in InDesign, we didn't push those changes back to the project, but we did push this abstract sizing back to the project. So you're always having to think about your context. You know, what have you loaded from the project? Have you made changes in just InDesign? Have you pushed those changes back to the project or not? And so in this case, we have not. And so we'll add some elements here to affect wrapping and how to push these next elements down. And then the other thing that we're going to do here is that I'm going to select the callout paragraph style. And this is really what the style was in our source nonlinear document. If you look here, this is what they're using for their paragraphs. This is the callout paragraph style. So we're setting that, and we're saying, oh, we want to use callout, and we'll save that back to Sitecore again. And normally this will work, but in this case it's not. If we reload the project, you'll see that that callout is not applied. And so why is that callout not applied? Well, it's a pretty simple concept, and we'll go into that a little bit further now. So if we go back to Sitecore and look at that abstract item within our PXM project, you actually see that that callout paragraph style is applied. So if we scroll down to the properties of that text frame, you can see here that the callout is actually applied. And so why is it being ignored by InDesign? And the answer is pretty simple. And the reason is that this original item or field type for the abstract, this is actually rich text. And so what's happening is, instead of that style being applied to the entire bit of text as it would for something like single line text, rich text actually goes through the PXM transformation engine, which means that what it's doing is it is actually looking at the underlying HTML, and it's looking at that P tag, and it's saying, the P tag uses this particular style within InDesign. So there's really two solutions. One is either apply a class, a CSS class to this, which can be transformed to a style within InDesign, or we take this abstract item and we change it to something like a multi-line text, which has no formatting on top of it. And so for this particular project, if you look at the actual launch Sitecore site, there is no real reason that this should be HTML. And in fact, something like an abstract, which can be reused in all sorts of contexts. So, you know, our print document, for example, it can be reused in lists. It can be reused in RSS feeds if we had a feed on that item. This is something that, realistically speaking, should not be rich text. It should be just simple text, either a single line text or a multi-line text. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually go back and update that item within the Sitecore templates to make this multi-line text, at which point the formatting which we apply on top of that in InDesign, which is that callout, can be used. And so to do that, that's really a Sitecore operation. We're going to go back to our article template, and you can see once this template loads that the article only has a few fields specific to articles, namely contributors and prerequisites. Everything else is inherited, and that article is actually inheriting the title, the abstract, and the body from another template called title, abstract, and text. And you can see here that the abstract is in fact rich text. So we're going to change that to multi-line text and hit save. And we'll go back to our original Sitecore article, and you can see here that it's pulled those p tags out of the HTML and just put them into the rich text. And the nice thing about rich text is you can move those things back and forth. There are a few field types in Sitecore that are relatively compatible, and so there's not too much to change here, and all of our original source content is remained. Now we also have this warning here: abstract does not contain paragraph tags. So this is the irony, is that by changing this from rich text to a multi-line text, we're triggering off validation because we're actually intentionally stripping our formatting, whereas the validation says, oh, we want to have some formatting. So what we're going to do later on is go and change some of the validation. We're going to be setting validation to ensure that all of our contributors fields have content, and so while we go in and update the validation on that contributor field, we're going to also strip out the validation that we had custom here, which was for that abstract. But we're going to do that later on. It's a bit of an advanced concept. So first things first, if we go back to our InDesign document and reload this project, you can see here that our callout is now applied. You're seeing it underneath the body text, but the callout is now being applied because it's no longer using the transformation engine. It's actually using the style that we applied manually onto that text frame within InDesign. So that's the first thing. Now the second thing that you'll notice is that the body was layered right on top of that. So what we're going to do is change a couple properties within our text frame here, and these properties will be saved back to that abstract text frame item within Sitecore. That's a really important concept. So we're going to right click and we're going to look at the text frame options and see here that I have inset spacing. So I'm going to add a little bit of spacing down at the bottom, about 1/4 of an inch, and I'll say OK, and you can see this second line here. That's really the inset spacing, and that's what I want between my callout and where my body starts. So that's great. And then the second property is to go to the fitting, and I'm going to say fit framed content. So what's going to happen now is this text frame is going to be created. It's going to be sized properly for the amount of content that I've fed into that from Sitecore. I'm going to have this spacing between the callout content and my body. And then the last thing I want to do is set these jump properties, which is to say jump object. And that means that regardless of where this starts, you'll see it gets pushed down. So I'm going to leave my body paragraph as it is. It's actually going to start higher up here, but all the content within that is going to be pushed down based upon the content here in my callout and my abstract text frame. So those three properties I changed. I changed the inset spacing, I changed the jump, and I've changed the fit frame so that this paragraph, this text frame, will automatically grow based upon the content coming from Sitecore. So I can save that, and I'm just going to save the layout. Again, these are all just layout options and properties within InDesign. And so now the next time I reload this content, you're going to see that based upon that text frame and all the properties that I've set on that, all the body text now flows naturally. So we're doing basically kind of a little flow within the document based upon variable length content coming from Sitecore. And that's a pretty key concept and a very common change for automation within InDesign. Normally, if you have access to a designer, this is the type of thing that they typically just do manually just to make a document look good. But when we're looking at PXM and we're looking at automating scenarios, you have to use more of the intelligence that is built into InDesign in order to replace that human intelligence that a designer would bring to that normally. So next we're going to look at a flow, and in the same way that we flow different text frames within each other, a flow within PXM is essentially a way of allowing you to flow text frames across a number of pages. And this used to be a fairly difficult thing to do in PXM 8. We've made it a lot easier, and so previously this was an advanced concept, and it's now something that's more or less easy to do and out of the box. So we're going to do that right now, and then last we'll do those validation changes to the abstract field and the contributors field, which is really more of a Sitecore step, and it's more optional. But we'll go and do that flow now, and then those that want to continue on to look at validation can do so. So we're back here in InDesign, and we're looking at the document that was provided to us again by Nonlinear Creations. Now, what they've done in this document makes a lot of sense and actually makes our job a little bit easier, in that they have different spreads for the chapter title. So you can see here, this is the B spread InDesign basically numbers things in alphabetical order as we're adding new spreads, and we will probably do that much later on within this document. But if we look now at an article, and I've double clicked on this chapter title, and this is the B spread, it's the chapter title, and then as soon as the article content continues, they switch to use the A spread for inside pages. And so we're going to set that for our flow as well. And this basically allows us to do the same thing. We've got this body text here, and initially we had this set to the A1 master. We're going to set this differently. We're going to use the B spread, the chapter title. And then as we continue our flow, we're going to switch to the A spread, which is those inside pages. Okay, so first part of what we're going to do for the flow, we're going to right click on our initial article page, and we can see here that it had set a default of A master, and that's actually not correct. We're going to use the B and chapter title. And then once we start to flow our content, we're going to switch that, and we're going to switch that to the C flow, and that's called no footer. So this is the first change we're going to make. The second is to actually click on the flow checkbox here. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to, within our spreads, we need to go and we need to name our layers correctly, and we need to name our text frames within our layer. Now this actually happens in the master document itself. So first thing we need to do again is go back to our libraries and download our NLC design master document. So we're going to go and load that, and we can look at our pages here, and we're going to go to the inside pages flow, and you can see this is layer 1. And this allows you to see which text frame is selected. So we can see this little blue dot here is indicating this is the text frame that we've selected. You can go and you can rename that by double clicking on that. Sometimes InDesign is a little bit tricky, and strangely it doesn't let you right click and say rename. This is a pretty finicky little operation. So we'll call this main flow, and then we'll select the next text frame here, and we'll call that main flow as well. And these can be given the same name because they're left and right pages. You can actually do a number of flows within a document and within a page, and that's one of the new things that we added for PXM 8. But in this case here, this is actually one flow in this page and one flow in this page. And then last but not least, we're going to go to our body item, and we're going to give this the same name. This is main flow, and we'll change that. And then we need to push this change that we did to the master document back to Sitecore. So we'll go ahead and save that. And then now if we go to our launch Sitecore article, and I'm going to close it, and I'm actually going to close my master document as well. So now if we load our project here, we're going to see that in addition to the one page that we always started with, we've now got a number of pages, and these are all added by the flow. So we've got our initial spread, which is that B chapter title spread, and then as defined by the flow properties in our page, we transition to the C spread. And again, within that C spread, the contents flow into that text frame which we named and defined. So our body basically says, right, I'm going to start with this content, but as I start flowing, I'm going to flow into the main flow text frame. And so you can see that is named, and the main flow text frame continues. Now, as we look through our document, there's a number of things here within the document. First off, the majority of the body text is fine. Our header is defined, or sorry, the abstract is defined properly using that call out. And the images are a little bit big. We can fix that. We're going to do that in a customization later on. And you'll see here that some of our styles are mapped correctly. We've got a page editor style, and that's fine. Font is missing. That's okay. We know about that. But then we've got all these other styles here. And more to the point, we've got these bullets. These are missing styles as well. And so while we went through and we used the transformation engine and we made a minor change within the transformation engine, well, in this case here, we're going to have to go through and make a number of changes. We're going to have to look at all of the elements that we have in our HTML. So we've got H1, H2, H3, H4, etc., etc. We have bullets. We may have other classes in the HTML as well. And we need to make sure that those are all accounted for, because if they're not, you'll see them come in basically as Times New Roman. And so we're not going to go through every single one, but in the background, I'm going to go and do that. And this is the type of exercise that you'd have to do in order to have your text show correctly. But that's essentially it. This is really, in a nutshell, the basics that you need to do to map to do a simple PXM project, to do simple item mapping and remapping so that we can see here that we're pulling the right content from the right Sitecore item. And then last but not least, a little bit of understanding of InDesign and how document layout can be automated slightly. And then using flows within PXM to basically use PXM to create a number of pages on the fly as the content requires it. So we now have an optional step to do validation within Sitecore. So we're going to turn off the abstract validation and we're going to add contributor validation. And then in the background, I'm going to go and I'm going to clean up these styles so that as we start loading this document in the future, we're going to see all of these corrected. But again, that's back in the transformation engine. And then next video series, we'll actually start to do some development to do things like fitting these images properly and on demand. We're going to fit that to the size of the column, and we're going to pull in related content such as the author name, and that's going to be coming from a lookup field in the Sitecore item. So I'm going back to Sitecore, and what we're going to do is we're going to change the validation properties for the abstract field as well as for the contributors field. Now this is an optional section. Feel free to skip it if you know validation already, or if you have a Sitecore developer who does these things on your behalf. But if you don't and you're interested, please follow along. So first and foremost, I'm going to go to the article template. And as you know, the article template just has a few fields here, and then it in turn inherits the title, abstract, and text template. So first off, we're going to go to the abstract, and we're going to remove validation on that. That's the easiest operation. So if we go to our data template, down to main, down to abstract, we're working with the abstract field here. You can scroll down and you can see validation rules, and I'm going to remove must require p tag, or must include p tags, and that's actually a validation rule that's custom with Launch Sitecore, and one of the articles in Launch Sitecore is how to make custom validation rules. We're going to remove that from all the places where validation occurs, so workflow, validator bar, etc., etc. So by removing all of these in validation, we can now remove that p tag, and we no longer get a warning coming from that abstract field. Second thing we're going to do is back on that article template, contributors, that's the field that we're adding. We want to ensure that contributors is actually used. So we'll go back to our validation rules here, and we're going to add required to the quick action bar, to the validate button, the validator bar, and workflow. So we'll save that. So now if we go to a Sitecore article such as the Sitecore user interfaces, you can see here that we have a contributor. If we go to the Launch Sitecore site, you can see, there is no contributor here. That you get a big red warning a number of places within the user interface. Here, if you have the validation rules bar on here, you can see that that's violating that. So we're going to say, great, we'll add Mike Casey, and we can save that. And now the warning disappears because we're passing validation.